Welcome to the Workers' Party podcast with Joti Brar. Hi, welcome to this Workers' Party of Britain interview. We are very, very lucky today to be talking to Cuba's ambassador to Britain and Ireland. She is Bárbara Montalvo, and she is here to share with us some of what's been happening in Cuba over the last while since we've had a chance to have contact before. In particular, the things we want to talk about today are the difference in the attitude to COVID between a socialist and a capitalist country. And we want to really hear the direct experience of the Cubans in how they have faced this pandemic, and particularly how they're facing the pandemic has interacted with the blockade, which of course has been something that's caused difficulties to Cuba and tried to strangle Cuba's revolution ever since the revolution happened, 60 years ago, but which in particular during COVID has caused particular problems. So I'd like to welcome you, Bárbara, to this interview. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to us and for our audience to hear directly from Cuba. And just ask you really, first of all, how did COVID first arrive in Cuba, and what were the precautions that the Cubans took when they knew it was bound to arrive?
First of all, many thanks, Joti, for this opportunity on such a special day like 13 August, the birthday date of our Commander-in-Chief, Fidel Castro. It is impossible to talk about Cuba's fight against COVID-19 without mentioning Fidel's role in the development of the biotech, genetic engineering, and science in general in Cuba, based on the principle that our main national research was the human capital. Fidel foresaw that one day the biotech development would contribute to the development of the nation, to the safeguarding of our population, and a better fulfillment of our internationalist duty. The most recent and moving example of this is what the Cuban scientific community is doing at this point in history. Remembering Fidel's legacy, if you don't mind, I want to mention that today, the online meeting, Fidel, a man of science with a vision for future, will be held at 3 p.m. UK time. And the event is organized by the Sao Paulo Forum and the Communist Party of Cuba. And you can watch it live on the Forum Facebook page in English. So let me talk a little about COVID-19. The Cuban health system is well known for its prevention work, and this has been one of the most important pillars in the battle against the pandemic. Our authorities reacted quickly to information from China about the coronavirus at the beginning of last year. In January 2020, our government established a national intersectoral commission for COVID-19, updated our national action plan for epidemics, initiated surveillance of at ports, airports, marines, provided COVID-19 response training for border and immigration officials, and drafted a prevention and control plan. Cuban specialists traveled to China to learn more about the new coronavirus behavior, and commissions of the Government Scientific Council began to work on combating the virus. Throughout February 2020, medical facilities were reorganized and staff training to control the spread of the virus domestically. In early March, a science and biotech group was created to develop treatments tests, vaccines, diagnostic kits, and other equipment. All of this was done before the virus was detected on the island. From 10 March, and both travelers were tested for COVID-19. And shortly after, we developed a health protocol in which social distancing and the use of facial masks, which has remained in force for all activities. In Cuba, all contacts were moved to isolation centers where they remained for 7 days and only returning home after a PCR test. All suspected and confirmed patients, symptomatic or asymptomatic, were admitted to hospitals. They all received medical treatment for 7 days, and a hospital discharge was granted after a negative PCR test. Then they continue in isolation at home for another 14 days with daily follow-up by family doctors. The public health system, Cuban public health system, together with biotech industries, work together to guarantee the medical treatments. Prophylactic and therapeutic interventions were carried out in Cuba, 17 of them with national products. And since the beginning of this year, the situation is different. We have been facing a second wave of the pandemic. This is not a specific problem of Cuba. Other countries also have faced it. New strains appear because during 2020, it was the Chinese strain, the main in Cuba, but later new strains appeared as Kent first, later South African, and more recently Delta, which is more contagious, and everyone knows the problem regarding this strain, after which the number of cases has increased exponentially since the beginning of June. Right now, we are in a second wave, and we are, of course, working on that. Currently, the isolation protocol has been updated, but because of it's easy to understand the economic situation of Cuba. If you remember my first comments, how much cost to sustain this kind of protocol. So the protocol has been updated in the case of asymptomatic and symptomatic patients who do not present complication of the disease and who do not belong to risk groups staying at home. All pregnant and puerperal women and children under 12 years of age are admitted to hospitals. The positive cases that are kept at home are followed up by family doctors with systematic home visits. I conclude that our authorities continue their efforts to stop the spread of the COVID. And the People's Vaccination Program is in course with our homegrown vaccines. It was impossible for Cuba to guarantee the all population vaccines. bought it. We do not have we do not have money for that. So we need to create our own vaccines. And as you must be aware, the Cuban National Regulatory Agency approved the Abdala vaccine on July 19, making Cuba the first Latin American country to develop a successful COVID vaccine, which is 92% effective after 3 doses. There are other candidate vaccines in the works, including Soberana 2, which is 91% effective when combined with a booster shot called Soberana Plus. All the provinces of the country are vaccinating. Havana, the capital, and the special municipality of Isla de la Juventud, Youth Island, concluded, and at the moment, more than 40% of the municipalities in the country are in the vaccination process in just 1 month since the authorization of Abdala. Meanwhile, the administration of doses to risk groups continues, of course. I should also mention that the vaccination of pregnant women in the first, second, and third trimesters, as well as of the women who breastfeed, is in this particular case are in this moment receive the vaccines. On the other hand, convalescent health workers have already been immunized with Soberana Plus. And there is a clinical trial named called Ismaelillo, which is a poem of José Martí. Ismaelillo is the name of a poem of José Martí. And this is a phase 1 and 2 study in the age between 3 and 18. According to official data collected by our War in Data as of 10 August, it's not a Cuban source, it's a British source. More than 10.9 million of 10.9 million of doses have already been administered in the country, with 25% of the population fully vaccinated. I think it's an enormous effort for a Cuban, a nation like Cuba, a country like Cuba, but it is not enough. We are continue, and we need to complete the vaccination program in order to guarantee a better condition regarding to the pandemic. And I mentioned that only 1.1% of people in low-income countries have received at least 1 dose. In Cuba, I repeat, 25% right now of all of our population is fully vaccinated. That's what I can comment to you and the friends about the COVID item.
It's wonderful. Thank you, Ambassador. And it's interesting, or it feels right that we're talking about this fantastic national effort of the Cuban people on Fidel's birthday, when, as you rightly said, he was a man of science. He and the revolution realized the importance of investing in things that would benefit the people. And not only the Cuban people, but people all over the world have been benefited by Cuba's work. And in fact, it's a lesson, I think, for us in anti-imperialism when, you know, the imperialists try to strangle every attempt of a nation or a people to be independent. But of course, with their sanctions, with their blockades, yes, huge suffering is caused. But also what is caused is a push back to become self-sufficient. And you see it all over the world that the longer sanctions regimes continue, the less effective they become. We're seeing it in Iran, we're seeing it in Russia, we see it in China, because countries develop the things they need for themselves and they start to cooperate with one another. So we see, for example, that you have had fantastic help from China in understanding this disease before it got to you, and that you, of course, were open to sharing this information. China tried very hard to share its knowledge of COVID-19 with the world. The imperialist countries did not want to know, they did not want to benefit from China's experience, they did not want to admit that China could have something to teach them about treatment, about isolation, about protocols of any kind, whether it's social or medical. But clearly Cuba doesn't have these arrogant hang-ups. Cuba's happy to cooperate internationally, both receiving information and sharing information. And of course, that's to the benefit of your people and people everywhere. And the other thing that really struck me from what you were saying was, you know, this wonderful good to the world which is going to come, you know, once Cuba's people can be vaccinated. Of course, we know, as in so many other things, the Cubans are bound to share their hard-won knowledge and expertise with their neighbours in Latin America and with others in the world who can benefit from that. So do you have plans to try to help other countries to produce your vaccines and to use them?
Yes, of course that Cuba, Fidel always focused a very important principle. He said, Cuba, people of Cuba, we have a doubt with the human being. We receive too much from others. And we act in a manner to respond to all of this that during our history we have received from others. It explains the internationalism principle that it's present in all of our work. First, I would like to underline that in this particular aspect of COVID, our scientists from Cuba are shared with many others around the world, of course, by virtual vias. The experience, our results, our drugs, all that we are can contribute to an effort that necessary be of all the humanity. All are affected by COVID. Right now, we don't know what will happen in the future, in the near future. We don't know that. So it's necessary to share information and experience and the results. We we produce some medicines in Cuba that is in the protocol of COVID, and we are some experiences our therapy, and all health personnel of Cuba are contribute in this manner. And by the other hand, we are attend some requestment, some interest of other country. In case of, for example, Iran, the Republic of Iran, we made an accord to extend in Iran the trial of the Soberana. And later we are conclude an accord to produce in a mixed by the Institute Pasteur, is the name? Yes. In the Institute Pasteur of Iran and the Institute of Vaccine of Cuba produce. And you know, we need to prevent and to attend the Cuban people, but it's sure that we share with people, with poor people, with poorest people that we have. So it will be a vaccines, I'm sure, not only for Cuban people.
I'm sure.
A vaccine for many others, you know. I would like to comment, if you don't mind, Joti, some aspects of the blockade.
Please do.
And because it's very important, this message, I think. We are facing the pandemic in a context of tightening of the blockade. It's an illegal blockade, and you know very much about it. These measures has been strengthened to unprecedented levels by the Trump administration, and Biden have nothing about it. Any change is the same. And as part of these measures, an intensive and defamatory campaign against the medical cooperation offered by Cuba has been conducted, which asks for the threat of sanctions against Cuba leaders and pressures exerted on recipient states to make them dispense with said cooperation. It means the Cuban medical cooperation has been one of more important target of the US attack. And this has to do with the solidarity and to share. For decades, we have accumulated experience in the international cooperation in the health sector, as acknowledged by the World Health Organization. Is public. And we have responded to cooperation requests because so far 57 brigades of healthcare professionals have been sent to join the nations and local efforts of 40 countries to combat COVID. And this health cooperation has been attacked permanently by the United States. We have also shared some medicines produced in Cuba, as I mentioned you, on the prevention of therapy against the disease, on all of these actions are undertaken without neglecting the responsibility of protecting of the Cuban population. But for the United States, it's unacceptable that Cuba has such a powerful health system capable not only of ensuring health care of its population, but also of providing international medical cooperation to millions of people around the world. And I can assure that assisting others and sharing what Cuba has in part of our values remain as a main principle of Cuban conduct. We will never give up doing what we know is a duty to do. I don't know if you want to some comments about the effects of the blockade, of any question in this particular aspect.
I mean, what occurs to me listening to you there, Barbara, is really the the stark contrast between the priorities of the imperialist countries and of a socialist country. And for the people of the world, the contrast is very, very clear. You know, we have only to look at your near neighbors. We look at Jamaica, we look at Haiti, you know, we look at what happens to the people in Puerto Rico, you know, to understand what we should compare the Cuban people's achievements with. It's not the swimming pools of Beverly Hills and the mansions of the super rich we need to compare you to. It's the plight of the poor in the rest of the world who have not yet broken free. And the fact that Cuba, so small Cuba, you look at the map, look how big is the United States, look how small is Cuba. Why is tiny Cuba such a threat to a huge global power like the United States? Do they need every resource, every worker? Well, actually they do. But also your example, and it's just by existing and being independent and showing what you can provide for your people, you're an example which shines a light, you know, so brightly around the world, and particularly across Latin America. But also, it's not just an example, because your solidarity actually materially helps others, even in small ways, and it encourages them. It encourages them to understand what they can do for themselves, and that another world is possible, that social change is possible, and building the new society is possible. And Cuba's steadfastness, the steadfastness of people who have made their social revolution and stand by it and build despite everything that's thrown at them by the biggest powers in the world. And it's the actions of little tiny countries like Cuba, or, you know, unequipped barefoot soldiers in Afghanistan, which show that imperialism is not the giant that it tries to show us that it is. It's not unbeatable. In fact, imperialism hasn't won a war since the Second World War, and that war was really won by the USSR, by the socialists. It was the socialists that beat fascism, not the imperialists. And, you know, so Cuba's role in the world is so important. And so we understand why it's the target of so much attack. And we also understand why the Cubans work so hard to defend themselves against these attacks. I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit, Ambassador, about the way that the US, and of course there was hope, there were a lot of hopes for people, progressive people around the world, that if Trump went and Biden came in, things would be different in Iran, different in Afghanistan, different for Cuba, different for Venezuela. And of course, in Latin America in particular, we've seen that the screws have got tighter, not looser. You know, we're not seeing any change in the rhetoric of this new administration, you know, new face, old face. It's the same system in power, and the same ruling class with the same agenda, and that seems very clear. But I wondered if you could talk to us a little bit about the way that the USA has used its economic power to try to stir up social unrest during this really difficult time.
Let me comment that during Trump's administration, because the present situation is a consequence of the last 5 years, for example. During Trump's administration, the blockade reached unprecedented level, as I comments, and 243 measures were applied, and 50 of them during the pandemic, and all focused affecting our main source of income. Cuba, at the end of Trump's administration, was included in the arbitrary and unilateral list of states sponsors of terrorism, which affects our currency exchange with third countries and preventing the acquisition of medical supplies or raw materials for the national production of medicines. And until the present, I insist, Biden administration has not changed any of these measures. It's interesting that the tightening of the measures and actions applied to asphyxiate Cuba, particularly during the pandemic, has taken place in the period when the Cuban model has undergone the most change. It is obvious that the goal is to prevent at all costs that this model prove efficient. As you are aware, as part of this ongoing campaign against Cuba, last 11 July, violent groups by the US government took advantage of the economic situation and the legitimate concerns of the population, because the situation is too hard, to undertake acts of vandalism against public places and edges in some cities of Cuba. And it is true that unprecedented events occurred in Cuba, but there was no social explosion on the island. And in the previous weeks, an intense political communication operation was developed by a large media and intoxication platform in which digital networks played a leading role in creating and encouraging an environment of confrontation, hatred, and violence against Cuba. It is important to highlight that SOS Cuba was not a level created in Cuba. It is not a movement generated in our country. An unconventional war is being waged against Cuba in this form of a soft cope. We have proof, and we presented this information and this proof to public. But despite the efforts of the sponsors of those operational, communicational, and political operation, the rupture of the constitutional order was not achieved on the island. The people, united with the wide consensus of the majority, vast majority of Cubans, prevented. At the present, the country remains calm. Internal order was soon achieved, and we continue to work because we have many things to do and many things to resolve and try to survive and to advance in the blockade conditions. But because the blockade, unfortunately, would not lift in a next period, in the next year. From my point of view, it is impossible. So we need but we need peace to work in those hard conditions. And we need to respect our right to prioritize our goals and provide a better conditions to the Cuban people. We have problems, and we resolve our problems ourselves. But the main obstacle to our development and to the better behavior of our economy, of our life in a general sense, is the blockade. Is a fact. And by the other hand, in the USA, the most advanced capitalist economy in the world, 11% of Americans live in poverty. 22% live in the substandard housing. 41% cannot afford healthcare. What? The US administration should worry about solving their own problems. Millions of US citizens need an SOS. And the US administration should decide the policy on Cuba based on the national interest of the United States. and the mutual benefits of a normal relationship, not on electoral interest. I think we are finishing, so I would like to finish with this a perception. It's not a perception, it's more than this, it's through a lesson. Fidel does not leave us a book, a catechism, or a collection of slogans, but masterly synthesis of the thought about what the revolution is, what it should always be, what principles it cannot abandon. He described it in all its dimensions, in redemptive, historical, moral greatness. And it also talks about how men and women who carry it forward should behave. And thus, those are the men and the women who will conduct the necessary transformations and defend our revolution. And we will never surrender. Never. Frankly speaking, I'm sorry if I was a little, I don't know, moved, but this is what I felt really at this moment in this very special. As you understand, Joti, Fidel is at this moment more present than ever in Cuba.
Ambassador, thank you so much. And you know, Fidel is yours in particular, but he is ours also. Fidel belongs to humanity, as all the leaders of the socialist movement belong to humanity, because they are helping us to go forward to a future which actually serves the masses, serves humanity, preserves our planet, enables us to live in dignity and freedom. And you know, when Cuba is standing today as such a shining example of what is possible despite everything the imperialists put in your way, you show us what humanity is, what solidarity is, what freedom really looks like. At a time when we in the West, in the richest countries, are seeing massive increases in poverty and inequality and unemployment, decreases in life expectancy, rising in infant mortality. All of the gains of the post-war period are being reversed, and a truly Victorian, what we used to call Victorian Britain, the ruthless capitalist way of life is coming back to our countries. And so what is being done for the Cuban people stands to us like a beacon of hope. We are with you. The British people who are progressive support you and learn from you, and will do everything in our power to spread an understanding of what Cuba really is against the media lies. But increasingly, British workers are learning to understand that the media is full of lies, and they are suspicious of the lies they are told. And the lies about Cuba, particularly after all these decades, are harder and harder to swallow, to be fair with you. And we are very happy to maintain our relationship with you, to hear from you, and we hope we'll be able to hear from you again. And in the meantime, on this really auspicious anniversary, we send our best greetings to you, to the Cuban people, to your party, and your president, and happy birthday, Fidel.
Thank you, Joti, Hugh, and the expression of my profound gratitude on behalf of the Cuban people to, I know how many British citizens from different political and ideology has beside our people. And I appreciate it so much. And for the comrade of the party, my best wishes for the future and the best for you and for your family. Please.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Be safe. Bye.
I hope we'll be able to do this again soon.
Okay. Ciao.
Thank you.